Welcome to Crossroads. Large-scale fraud, even more of it, in fact maybe even larger now, has been uncovered in Los Angeles, and this ties in with people defrauding the hospice system. All those poor people, they're actually stealing money from dying grandmas. It's pretty terrible. Meanwhile, Scott Turner, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, explained how illegal aliens were taking advantage of yet another taxpayer-funded program. This one was using mixed status loopholes in these subsidized housing programs. And on another topic, the U.S. government seems to be tired of this, and they've suspended visas to people from countries, entire countries, where they deem people more likely to take advantage of things like welfare. You have some countries where the migrant populations, literally about 98% of every household is on welfare. I'll be talking about these topics and a lot more today, so make sure to hit the like button. Let's get started. All right, first of all, large-scale hospice fraud is being uncovered in Los Angeles. Now, this comes on the heels of what we saw in Minneapolis, where the Somali community was doing pretty large-scale fraud, using like daycares and fake daycares and things like that. Same thing in Los Angeles, but a lot of this has to do with hospice. This came after people found out around 31% of all hospice and home healthcare companies in the entire United States, 31% in the entire country, are registered in a single county, which is Los Angeles. And people have been looking into it. CBS actually did a decent on-the-ground report on it. And CBS followed some of the same models used by independent journalists elsewhere, looking into fraud in places like Minneapolis. Basically, you go there to the actual locations, you knock on some doors, and you see, well, these things are kind of weird. People are not acting normally. They look like they're hiding something, and frankly, none of the places look like they're doing the businesses they claim they're doing. This is an overview of how this works from CBS News. Watch this.
The government thinks this woman is dying in hospice care, but she just humiliated me, schooled me on the pickleball court. She's definitely not dying. She is a victim, though, of hospice fraud. So hospice fraud costs taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars every year, and California is ground zero. So basically, people steal Medicare numbers, they enroll them in hospices, and then bill for tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. A lot of these companies are just fronts. So over 700 of the roughly 1,800 hospices in LA County trigger multiple red flags for possible fraud. So we went door to door, and what we found was empty office spaces, piled up mail, and not a single healthcare worker in sight. There's even a stretch in LA with 500 registered hospice companies within just 3 miles of each other. In fact, there's even a single building with 89 registered hospice companies.
Now here's a bit more from the report on it. Again, this is CBS News. They say this: Medicare is federally administered and hospices must be certified for reimbursements, but the state issues the licenses for hospices to operate. Now remember this, because this is going to be a big deal. If you want to get my personal take on this, the CBS article kind of is, in my opinion, carrying water for the local officials that were in charge of issuing the licenses for these hospice centers. They try to make it appear that the local California government has done a lot to actually try to stop this. When in reality, if you have massive fraud taking place and you're the one in charge of issuing the licenses for it to operate, there's something wrong. Just frankly, there's something wrong. And the CBS News article makes it appear that kind of nothing's wrong, that they're trying to fight the good fight and somehow just slip through the cracks. This is kind of the same argument made in Minneapolis, where Governor Tim Walz and other officials are facing a lot of pressure. The big argument on both sides is this, right? On one side, you have a lot of Republicans saying, gee, there's massive, rampant fraud. How did you all allow this to happen? On the Democrat side, you have a lot of officials saying, look, it's a huge program, especially during COVID, when a lot of this fraud actually started. A lot of this goes back, within the last 5-6 years. They're saying, well, tons of migrants came in, tons of new programs, tons of reimbursements, and it's just too much to keep track of. And some stuff slipped through the cracks, and we're doing our best to fight it. That's kind of backfired in Minneapolis, where it turned out, again, with the Somali fraud rings, and actually even expanded beyond them now, they're actually finding that whistleblowers were being punished if they tried exposing the fraud, that people were coming forward exposing it, they were getting attacked, silenced, and so on. That the bodies that were made to work as the kind of auditors, checking to make sure the stuff wasn't happening, they were getting blocked, they were getting attacked, the whole 9 yards. Journalists were getting shut down, the whole 9 yards. And so it went beyond just things slipping through the cracks to actually looking like knowing fraud taking place and the covering up of fraud. Now, is that the case in Los Angeles? We'll have to wait and see. As a CBS article notes here, the state issues the licenses for hospices to operate. But again, they cover up a bit for the local government. They say this: 3 years ago, California's state auditor sounded the alarm that Los Angeles County had seen a 1,500% increase in hospice companies since 2010, more than 6 times the national average related to its elderly population, which is weird, by the way. They say auditors estimated LA County hospices overbilled Medicare by $105 million in a single year. Now look, CBS is saying $105 million in possible fraud. Other estimates put it in the billions, okay? So this is, again, kind of the dual nature here. Sometimes you have investigations that look like they're doing real investigations, but they kind of stop short, and they kind of do the investigation in a way that covers up the real problems, actually. Like local corruption, like the fact that an auditor actually warned about this. And the question is, well, if they warned about it, if the auditor warned about it, why was nothing done? Why was nothing done? Why did it have to wait for independent journalists to go and find out that something was weird for something to be done? Why did they wait for that? Why did they not move on people saying it looks like there's massive fraud taking place? Who are the local people in charge of auditing this? Why were the audits not taken serious? Who blocked the investigations, or why was action not taken? For investigative journalists, these are the real issues you look into. And the article doesn't quite do that. It says here, further in, it says the CBS News analysis reveals that over 700 of the roughly 1,800 hospices in LA County trigger multiple red flags for fraud as defined by the state. Get that, 1,800 hospices, roughly 700 of them raise multiple red flags. Not just one, not even one red flag, multiple red flags, quote unquote, for fraud as defined by the state. That's a little less than half of the number of hospice centers look like they could be fraudulent. And again, the question is, why was no action taken? Why did they have to wait for independent journalists to go out there and look? Speaking of independent journalists, there's actually a pretty good investigation also done. This is by investigative journalist Christian Hartstock. Watch this.
Printed sign closed for lunch. We will return shortly. It seems to be a pretty permanent looking, it's not just a sticky note. It does not seem like a temporary tag you just put on a door to say out to lunch. It says out to lunch. Okay. Well, I take it that they are still out to lunch. Maybe they're all out to lunch together. Great Life Hospice. Okay. Is it a whole lunch outing amongst healthcare competitors? Hi.
No, this don't hospice. I don't.
This is not hospice? Okay, well, what kind of health do you provide here?
I'm sorry, you can't come.
But it says 9 to 5. Hello? It's open, so let's go in. I'm documenting this for my grandma because I'm trying to enroll her in healthcare. Oh, I'm not soliciting. I'm so convenient. Every possible healthcare need you could possibly need all in one building on one floor.
A pretty interesting video. Basically goes into this building where there's multiple hospice, healthcare facilities registered, knocks on some doors, there's no patients, there are no clinics, there are no healthcare providers. There's a, sorry, we're out for lunch sign that is framed and looks like it's permanently in place. Look, if you go to a business and they say, we'll be back in 30 minutes, we're out for lunch. Normally it's like something they hang on the doorknob. It's not typically something they nail to the wall and frame like a permanent, fixture. Now, I mean, to that point, if you're an investigative journalist, you'd go back a few hours later and you'd see if that sign was still there to see if it's a permanent fixture or a temporary thing. But he actually later in the video gets kicked out of the building. He knocks on a door. It's like a guy running some weird repair shop. Guy looks like he's from like Eastern Europe or Russia. I don't know which. But the individual actually calls the police on him, has him kicked out of the building, and it's a very weird encounter. But what he finds here is important. He goes and knocks on doors. And when he knocks on doors, he finds that no, these are not healthcare providers. No, these are not hospice centers. These businesses do not provide the services that they're registered as providing. And that's a pretty dang big deal. We'll see what comes out from this. Again, if you go by CBS News, they're saying around $100 million in possible fraud. If you go by some conservative whistleblowers and investigative journalists, they're saying that the amount of fraud taking place through the hospice system in California could be even bigger than the fraud we're finding in Minneapolis with the Somalian community. This could actually be like in the billions. Again, it depends on who you want to believe, though. Very, very, very different analysis on how much money this is actually costing the American taxpayer. But this also ties into something important, which is this. Just the Somali fraud in Minneapolis, over the course of about 10 years, which is about how long this stuff's been going on, they're currently estimating this could have cost American taxpayers like $100 billion. Roughly if they're stealing, you got to think like $10 billion or more a year from American taxpayers. Of course, 10 times 10, you're looking like $100 billion. There are some estimating that actually a large chunk of our taxpayer dollars in their entirety are being stolen through fraud, fraudulent payments, people ripping us off, scammers, and the whole 9 yards. That actually a huge chunk of what you're paying in taxes every year is being stolen by individuals like these. Now, speaking of which, Scott Turner, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, he actually explained illegal aliens have been taking advantage of taxpayer-funded housing, and they're using a loophole in the mixed status system. I'll be talking more about this after a quick break.
All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. Yeah, I see somebody in the chat asking, when will we see arrests on this stuff? Okay, so there have been different narratives on the arrests and prosecutions. Let's talk first about Minneapolis. So after fraud was exposed in Minneapolis, again, you had local journalists, independent journalists, not mainstream ones, go out, knock on doors. The mainstream media called them racist for doing reporting. But they actually found a lot of fraud. And what happened was the FBI responded to that fraud. The FBI actually deployed pretty large-scale operations there, looking into it. And they actually did arrest a lot of people. They actually did carry out a lot of arrests. Now, you saw different narratives coming out from those arrests. Some of the stories going around was that local, judges, basically what was happening, and I'll tell both sides of this because this happened on some scale, but it was not the big picture, okay? The small scale picture a lot of people were shown was this. There were several Somalian fraudsters arrested, guilty, stood before a jury. The jury said these guys were guilty, and the judge actually pardoned them. Like the judge, you had a guilty verdict, the jury agreed they were guilty, the evidence showed they were guilty, the people basically admitted they were guilty, and the judge let them off the hook. That did happen on a small scale. That did happen on a small scale where you had cases like that. But that was not the big picture. The big picture, and FBI Director Kash Patel actually came out and talked about this, the big picture is you actually did have a lot of these people put in prison. A lot of them were put in prison. And the Trump administration actually took it so seriously, they're looking to denaturalize people. They're not only looking to deport illegal aliens or people who committed fraud in the process of coming here. They're looking to even denaturalize people who became American citizens because the problem is some of the people committing the fraud are not quote unquote migrants. Some of them are actually U.S. citizens, but some of them the ones who were born here and are birthright citizenship so be it. Nothing you can do about that. But the ones who were naturalized, the Trump administration is talking about denaturalizing some of them. So there is action taking place. It's not on a large scale, but there is action taking place. Yes, you have some people getting let off the hook. That's not the majority. I know in the chat some of you were also asking, kind of the big picture. Because, you have the guys on the ground, you have the fraudsters, but then you have the problem too of who was covering it up? What about the local officials that were, again, suspected, we can say, of covering it up? What about the judges who've been letting people off the hook? Will anything be done about this? Probably not the judges. Touching the justice system is a very difficult thing to do. I can tell you one of the ways it's often viewed is you're never going to have a perfect system on that front, and it's safer to keep politicization out of the justice system as much as possible, which includes not removing judges. There are processes through which you can do that. Currently, there's no talk of doing that. Again, if you want to change that, you're going to have to go and elect better district's attorney, right? You're going to have to elect better DAs and better sheriffs if you want to deal with that side of things. I know that won't solve the judges issue, but a lot of this goes to the DAs. In terms of local officials, though, there are recommendations for criminal indictments possibly against several of them. This is going to go area by area. If you were to ask me, actually, this is one of the bigger things in Minneapolis. If you want to get my take on why what's happening, I know we're talking about two areas here. We're talking about Los Angeles and Minneapolis. Los Angeles has the problem now they're fighting with hospice fraud. Minneapolis has the problem of Trump was talking specifically about the Somalian migrant community and large-scale fraud, including but not limited to daycare centers. Where again, they've stolen at least $10 billion a year. And they're sending it to Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist organization in Somalia, and so on like that, right? When you get to what's happening in Minneapolis, why is that such a big deal? This is why. If you want to get my take on it, the reason this is such a big deal is not because of migrants. The reason this is such a big deal is not because of fraud among migrant communities. This thing is not really about illegal aliens. This thing is not really about, I'd say, small scale, but on a large scale crime. I mean, small amounts by lots of individuals. That's not why this matters so much. Do you know why this matters so much? It's because if the Trump administration can incriminate local officials for effectively turning a blind eye to crime committed by illegal aliens, by suggesting that by allowing it to happen, by blocking investigations, by blocking deportations, that the local officials are by extension possibly guilty of crimes themselves, That is a method they could use across the entire United States because that's happening everywhere. The reality is, if you were to step back and look at the big picture, the reality is this. You have large-scale crimes being committed by migrants. It's true in America, it's true in Europe, it's true just about everywhere, okay? It's true in Japan. And the problem is, because there are people who do not want deportations, and they don't want to make these migrant communities or illegal alien communities look bad, they don't want there to be like racism or hatred, they're covering it up. They're not documenting it. They're reducing crimes. They're reducing sometimes felonies to misdemeanors. They're blocking audits. They're blocking investigations, as we're seeing, for example, in Minneapolis. I'm not spurting out hot air here. This is exactly what was happening in Minneapolis. They're silencing whistleblowers. They're silencing the auditors. The auditors are warning about it, as we saw in Minneapolis, as we saw in Los Angeles, where the auditor actually warned about this 3 years ago and no action was taken to do anything about it. Why is that a big deal? It's because what they've effectively been doing is protecting these communities from facing justice. And by doing so, they've allowed fraud to take place on a very large scale. Fraud that, if it is exposed to the American people, can potentially change the perspective of these communities, which is one reason why you could say they didn't want it to be exposed. It makes people, let's be honest, it kind of makes people more racist, okay? And so they don't want that coming out. There are reasons you don't want it coming out. Why is that? It's because not everybody who's a migrant is doing this. And if you group them all together, that's not very nice either. But by allowing crime to take place and not punishing it, they've effectively created a bigger problem. What's going to happen when that gets exposed? People are going to say, oh my gosh, I can barely afford groceries and these people are stealing tens of billions of dollars a year. I can barely afford groceries and these people are buying mansions by defrauding literally children and dying old people. Like, you can't get more like evil than that. You know, like you're robbing children, like in need children, and you're robbing like dying elderly people. Like there's no way you can make excuses for that, okay? Like if you're robbing hospice and daycare centers for like, you know, underprivileged families, like there isn't much of a middle ground you could say where like, okay, maybe that's okay. Like that's not okay at all. And so what is happening now? As this gets exposed, people are saying, oh my gosh, how did this happen? Because you're dealing with an affordability crisis right now. You actually are. I know there's mixed reports on it, but we do have an affordability crisis. A lot of Americans can barely afford to get by. When they see that effectively the hardworking Americans are being robbed, that they're being taken advantage of, they're being scammed, like on a huge scale, and that local officials have been acting to protect these communities because a lot of them are illegal aliens or, you know, migrants, that actually it makes them look bad. And if the Trump administration can secure possible criminal sentences of officials who were involved in the cover-up, just in Minneapolis, maybe even Los Angeles, that is something they can replicate across the entire country. Because look, you had like 23 Democrat states blocking these types of audits, blocking these types of investigations. Because again, they're trying to protect the migrant communities. They don't want people being deported. But if the blocking of investigations extends to not just blocking people from being deported, but blocking criminals from facing justice, it's a big deal. That's why this matters so much. Now, does that mean the Trump administration is going to go in and like arrest everybody? In my take, probably not. But what it does mean is that local officials who have been blocking investigations now risk facing justice because they could be guilty by association. You understand that? Like the local officials who've been blocking audits, who've been blocking the federal government from getting records, the blocking of that could make them, effectively like part of the crime. That's why it matters so much. That's why this is such a big deal. Speaking of which, speaking of fraud, Scott Turner, Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, has explained how illegal aliens have been taking advantage of yet another thing: taxpayer-funded housing using a mixed status loophole. Watch this.
Says is, and if you're living in HUD-funded housing, you have to be an American citizen or eligible. If you're not, you cannot live in HUD-funded housing. What does this do? It prioritizes American people and American people only with taxpayer dollars. And so that opens up space for Americans to live in American taxpayer dollar housing, which is public housing authorities through HUD. We also made it so that if you're here illegally, you cannot get an FHA-backed mortgage, right, which is taxpayer-backed mortgages. You have to be an American citizen to get an FHA-backed mortgage. I alluded to our qualified citizens' new proposed rule to close that loophole of mixed status. During the Biden administration, one could say, I want to live in public housing through HUD. And they could make a declaration on their form that says, I'm a U.S. citizen with no proof. Wow. And because they're a U.S. citizen, now those that are in their family could also sign a form that says, I do not contend my immigration status. And so now you have legal and do not contend, which create mixed status inside of HUD-funded housing. The Biden administration was turning a blind eye to the law. We're not. We closed that loophole. So now we estimate there will be a transfer of about $200 million of assistance to go to eligible U.S. citizens to live in HUD-funded housing. And so closing our border, securing our border is a big deal, even as it pertains to housing.
So basically what was happening was this. In the United States, we have affordable housing. We have subsidized housing for, usually it goes to like single moms with a lot of kids, or, if the dad is disabled and he can't work, it's for those kinds of families, right? This was basically being stolen by illegal aliens and non-citizens. It wasn't just illegals, it was just people who weren't American citizens. Now, there were some rules in place before to kind of prevent that from happening. What has changed now is it's actually broader than that, right? It's broader than that. This was basically people lying, telling lies in order to get that affordable housing meant for American taxpayers, right? Made for American citizens. And there are a lot of ways it was happening, right? What's interesting here, this is not just about non-citizens or illegal aliens going and applying for housing. I mean, some of it was. Basically, here's how it worked. You're a non-citizen, you want to go on welfare, you're in New York, you're in California, you're in a sanctuary state. Effectively, what that does is they're not allowed to ask you your legal status. So when you go and apply for it, they can't say, well, are you an American citizen? Press 2 for whatever other language, right? Press 1 for English, press 2 for whatever other language it is, right? They will have to talk to you in whatever language you have. They know you're not really from here, but that's how it worked, right? And so because they're not allowed to ask you of your legal status, they're not allowed to ask of these types of things, it was an open door. Basically, these things were available to everyone. And that's been the Democrat narrative for a long time, right? That we represent everybody. We care about everybody. And what they mean is American citizen, non-American citizen, illegal alien, you're represented all the same as long as you're here. That's been the narrative, right? Now, what has also been happening is something else, which is, and this is kind of the gray area. Sometimes you have, parents who are illegal aliens and the kids are American citizens. And so the kids can get subsidized taxpayer housing and the parents live with them, and then you have like a mixed status household. Citizens and non-citizens living together as one, right? That's kind of how it works. There are different arguments on that. There's a lot of cases of this, especially because of anchor baby type laws where if you have a kid here, your kid's automatically a citizen. And you have a lot of systems like that where people come here, they have kids. They cannot technically get welfare, although they do because, again, New York and other areas are not allowed to ask for legal status. They have 2, 3 kids. The kids can get different government services, and so the family goes on welfare and gets American tax dollars and subsidized housing because the kids are citizens. And that's one of the biggest ways a lot of this, fraud. You could call it fraud. You could call it a loophole. Maybe it's better to call it a loophole because it is semi-legal. That's one of the big ways it was happening. The other big way it was happening with this subsidized housing is you might have a bunch of migrant workers come and rent a house. One of them might be an American citizen. The rest may not be. And because, the American citizen is the one who kind of, gets the status, they rent it, they bring their friends in, and it's mixed status. They have citizens and non-citizens living together. The other big fraud you have happen, and this happens on a very large scale, including with even Uber and Uber Eats, although I know they're cracking down on it, which is someone buys it and then basically leases it out to non-citizens. So what you have happen is this. And you have an American citizen who basically rents a house, doesn't live there, and then rents the house out by extension to non-citizens and illegal aliens. And so they basically use their status to get this subsidized housing, and then they make money by renting it out, a couple tiers down. You have the same thing happening through businesses. I know one of the big things is people were talking about, for example, if you're not an American citizen, you can't get you can't be a delivery driver for Uber or Uber Eats. And so what was happening for a long time is you'd have people basically register accounts, and they would lease their accounts like a rental service to illegal aliens. And so they'd buy the accounts of these people, which is why if you, for example, if your phone said that it was going to be delivered by, a regular American guy, and some guy who's very much not an American guy comes to your door, it's because they were leasing it out. Now, on that front, I know that just on that point, because I mentioned it, Uber has actually been working to close that loophole. I know I've talked to some Uber drivers about this. They've actually made it a requirement where randomly or every few hours sometimes, you actually have to look in your phone and do a facial scan to basically prove that you are who you say you are, so they can prove that someone's not renting out the license for people to use. But the same thing was happening through the housing system, basically. Now, on a related topic also, because this is becoming such a big issue, the Trump administration is kind of going scorched earth on this. The Trump administration is actually doing some, and you could argue whether this is a good thing or not, because they're kind of going pretty far with it. The Trump administration is now making it so that foreigners are losing their ability to get a lot of programs. Basically, subsidized housing, basically, they even froze some of the medical or daycare programs in Minneapolis. They actually froze a lot of the government money for that. So you have legitimate businesses and illegitimate businesses getting shut down effectively or defunded until they can audit them. You have the same thing happening with taxpayer-funded loans for small businesses, where foreigners in their entirety are now losing their ability to get taxpayer-funded loans for small businesses. This is directly from the U.S. Small Business Administration. Let me explain. They say this: today, in the effort to prioritize American job creators, the U.S. Small Business Administration, the SBA, issued a new policy notice to ban foreign nationals and non-citizens, so you could be a foreigner or just not a citizen, from accessing SBA guaranteed small business loans. It says the latest notice, which applies to the agency's surety bond and microloan programs, builds on the policy change implemented earlier this month, which made any small business owned in whole or in part. So it could be, again, these mixed status things where you have an American citizen and a non-citizen working together. Even if you're working with a non-citizen on this, in whole or in part, by a foreign national ineligible for the program, for the agency's flagship 504 and 7A loan programs, they say small business owners applying for any SBA loan program must be U.S. citizens or U.S. nationals with their principal residence in the United States. Big deal. Very big deal, right? Now, further in, they say in fiscal year 2025, SBA approved, it's not much, but they say they approved 3,358 loans for small businesses owned in part by a lawful permanent resident, largely during the Biden administration, representing 4% of the agency's total 85,000 loans approval. So basically, this applies to about 4% of the program, right? They say with a finite lending authority and record demand for capital thanks to President Trump's economic agenda, SBA is prioritizing the agency's guaranteed loan programs for American citizens. And they say the new policy will take effect 30 days after publication. Now, on that front, you have a lot of areas in the U.S. very much not happy about this. Los Angeles, for example, they're threatening to take action against the Trump administration for doing this because basically they want non-citizens to be able to get loans, small business loans. Los Angeles, last I checked, is the second largest Spanish-speaking city in the world, not just the United States. Again, you have a huge non-citizen population there, and they're basically worried that making it so that non-citizens can't get small business loans will affect business. Now, there are different arguments with this, right? There are some legitimate arguments with this. One of the big arguments is this. Well, geez, don't you want, migrants working? Don't you want them starting businesses? Why would you not want them to create, money? Why would you not want them to create work here? Many people know that you go to bodegas, you go to, you have different migrant communities oftentimes who are involved in different industries. There's stereotypes around it, but it's kind of true. And it's because a lot of times with, for example, franchises, it's easier to get a franchise license. For example, you might have, for example, like donut shops. I know donut shops used to be more of a Cambodian thing. The nail salons tended to be more like Vietnamese, right? I'm speaking about like kind of the broad picture, not absolutely. But you do have migrant communities that lean more towards certain businesses. Some of the corner stores, they tend to be certain, migrant groups and so on and so forth. Do you not want that? That's kind of the big issue. Now, on that point, SBA loans, small business loans, might be different from like a franchise type program. You still have a lot of people going for franchises, and there's benefits to that. The other big benefit you have to this, if you go to some pretty bad neighborhoods, a lot of times it's not like your normal business, American citizen business guys starting up like the liquor store or the corner store or the grocery store or whatever else. A lot of times it is migrant communities doing the small businesses in bad neighborhoods. And, that's one of the arguments for having it. The other problem you have, though, is that, look, they're not giving out that many loans. And if American citizens are suffering, if American citizens are getting rejected from getting loans and non-citizens are getting the loans, is that fair to Americans? Is it fair to Americans when we are not able to basically live successful lives and priority, in some case, like 4% in this case, but priority is being given to people who are not American citizens? Is that fair to us? What that does is it creates more competition for those loans. And you could say, well, that creates a higher threshold for it. Maybe they'll give loans to people with better credentials. They're more likely to succeed. But that also means that there's a higher threshold of competition. So, in other words, if you're an American citizen, you have to have better credentials to be able to compete with non-citizens. And it makes it more difficult for everybody. That means that because there's a higher threshold, if you're not someone who went to college, or maybe you don't have as much going for you and you're trying to get out of the hole, it's a higher bar to pass. It's more difficult. And is that fair to American citizens? That's the argument for it. Now, like also on this front, the Trump administration is getting kind of fed up, and they're going pretty far with this. On the note of everything we've discussed, and frankly a lot more, the U.S. government is actually doing something pretty drastic. They are suspending visas to people from entire countries where people are more prone to take things like welfare. And this has been interesting as it happens. Let me show you first what's coming out. This is from the visa branch of the U.S. Embassy Tokyo, which is kind of funny because Japan is like not on the list. They do tend to have pretty like hardworking migrants when they do come here. But this is from the U.S. Embassy Tokyo. They say this. The Department of State has temporarily suspended the issuance of immigrant visas to nationals of countries with high rates of public benefit receipt. Basically, you have some countries where people migrating from them are more likely to overwhelmingly receive some kind of government benefit. Overwhelmingly, they're going to go on welfare. Overwhelmingly, they're going to get food stamps. Overwhelmingly, they're going to need all kinds of different government services. These entire countries are being blocked from migrating to the U.S. temporarily. It says, President Trump has made it clear that immigrants must be economically self-sufficient and not become a financial burden on American taxpayers. Immigrant visa applicants who are nationals of the affected countries may continue to proceed with their immigrant visa applications and attend their scheduled interviews. They say this suspension does not affect non-immigrant visas. Very big deal. Yeah, just reading some of the comments. Yeah, B. Williams 9473 say, no, Josh, these people are also competing with American citizens with degrees. I have stories for days. Yeah, that's what I was saying. So, again, you have both sides of it. Let's lay out the problem for the American citizen, okay? So American citizens are basically being forced to compete on a much higher threshold than we should, okay? What does this look like for the American citizen? If you're let's go through the life cycle of an American, okay? If you're a child and you go to school, there's limited amounts of money given to public school systems, okay? Limited amounts of money. I can tell you direct stories. I know somebody who was a lunch lady in Riverside County. This is the story of migration. The school went from being a pretty decent school, you're talking a more rural area, and it was a good school. They started getting mass migration, and because they started getting mass migration, they started having to have security guards because they started having problems of gangs. So the school started having a crime and gang problem. They had to use some of their budget for security guards, for even like metal detectors, because you had a gang problem. And you could say it's because you have kids coming from countries that have gang problems, frankly. That was an issue. The school continued having money problems, right? You started dealing with larger classrooms, 30 kids per teacher. The teacher has less time for each kid. The quality of education goes down. Then they start having to use their money for ESL classes, English as second language. And you're not just talking about English and Spanish. You're talking about English, Spanish, in like New York, it's over 100 languages. They have to have a language program for every single kid from every single country these people are coming from. And what happens? Well, they have to start shutting down the after-school programs. They get rid of their sports programs. They get rid of like the things that kind of get kids off the streets. They get rid of all that stuff, and they have to divert it to all these ESL and other programs or programs for kids who are behind, because another issue you could have a kid who should be a sophomore, but the quality of education in the country they come from is like middle school level, right? Or even further behind than that. You have kids who are several years behind the standard of American education. They don't speak English, they don't have math skills, they can't read, and so the school has to accommodate them. So they have to create all these new classes for these kids. And what happened in one exact case that I know about, they had to actually get rid of even their security guards. So a school that already had a problem with gangs, a problem with violence, a problem with crime, suddenly lost its after-school programs and lost its security guards and lost the quality of education because of migration. So the quality of education went down, the safety of the community went down, you started having a lot of problems with crime, you had gang problems, because again, they couldn't deal with it all. And then you have kids going to the school who have to now live with that. They have to live with real danger to their lives. They have to deal with real gangs. They have to deal with this stuff which they never had to deal with before. at least not on that scale. And so, quality of education goes down, safety goes down. That's your experience as an American student. Then you graduate from high school. Then what happens to you? Well, here's what happens if you graduate high school. You go and apply to a college. And the college is letting in, they're bringing people in from other countries. They're prioritizing people of, migrant backgrounds. They're doing race-based admissions. They're, again, prioritizing student loans for people like that, and you just get denied. It's very hard to get in. If you do get in, it's a very high bar. And so you might go one of two ways. You get into college or you don't. If you don't, you probably do like community college or something simple like that, right? You have to go to like a cheaper college or not as good of an education. You go through that, then what happens? Well, either you have a degree or you don't, and you have three options at that point. Well, you do the low-paying jobs, which are the restaurant jobs, the delivery jobs, and things like that. You do those, guess who you're competing with? You're competing with illegal alien delivery drivers. You're competing with illegal alien Uber drivers. I guess now they've changed that a little bit. You're dealing with restaurant workers who are heavily illegal aliens. You're dealing with huge competition for the lowest bar jobs that used to be starter jobs. So you don't have starter jobs anymore. If you go the I did not graduate from high school route, I went to vocational route. I decided to go into the trades. I can say from experience, I actually out of high school did an apprenticeship for general contracting for carpentry. I actually did that as a student myself when I graduated from high school. I also went to community college, but that's how I did it. I was doing an apprenticeship and I was going to school. The problem you have with that is the trades are now taken over by illegal aliens. And I know guys who work in businesses with this. It's very hard to recruit. You're dealing with an industry that is just saturated with illegal aliens. A lot of times they bid below contract because they're living in mixed status households. They're paying a lot less. They don't pay taxes. They have a lot of ways where their overhead is much lower. They can pay their friends less money, and it's very hard. The amount of money you pay for them, as an apprentice, you make maybe $15 an hour. These guys are now competing with that, and maybe if you know what you're doing, they're going to pay like $25 an hour as a starter. You're facing heavy competition on that. So you can't really get the low-paying jobs because of people taking the restaurant jobs and everything else. You can't get the vocational jobs or the blue-collar jobs because it's saturated with illegal aliens. You say, well, geez, what are my options? I guess I'll try to go back to school and get like a high-paying job, like maybe a STEM field job. You go to school, you work your butt off, you get your degree. Then what happens? You're competing with H-1B visas. That's what happens. You're competing with businesses that are flooding in H-1B visa recipients. And so you're dealing then with huge migrant populations also competing with you on that front. Now, you could say for some businesses this is a good thing. For businesses, this means you have a larger pool of people competing for the same jobs, and you can pick the most qualified person or the person who will accept the least amount of money. For the average worker, this is a horrible thing, though, because what it means is this. It means for the average person, unless you're a business owner, or even for business owners, I know there's problems with it. I'm not saying that's not a problem for them too. For the average person, it means because there is higher competition, it means you're less likely to get a job, and if you do get a job, you're going to get paid less money for it, and your job is less secure because the competition is higher. That is the experience of the American citizen, okay? If you go on welfare because you just can't get by, if you go on welfare, then what do you deal with? Well, then you're dealing with competition for subsidized housing. Then you're dealing with competition for subsidized daycare. Then you're dealing with all these things that are just rampant with fraud. Then, hey, maybe I'm old and I need someone to take care of me. Then you're dealing with things like what they're finding in Los Angeles, where there's massive fraud being taken place through healthcare systems, through, again, hospice systems and so on. I mean, this is a big deal. And then you're dealing with other problems. Mass competition for limited housing. Housing prices go up, rent goes up because you have a finite resource with artificial increased competition for a finite resource. Basic economics, supply and demand. If you have a house that's up for rent and 20 people are trying to get it, what happens? They charge more for it. If you have a house up for rent and you're competing with 20 other people looking for someone to rent, what happens? You lower the price. So what happens if in an area where there's limited housing, you then increase the population by maybe 500 or 1,000 people? It means that you've now created higher competition for a finite resource, and so rent goes through the roof. The baseline of survival, the baseline for cost of living goes very high. Some people make out very well, but the average person suffers. This picture is why I think this is such a big deal for a lot of American voters. This picture is why I think this is such a big issue. And then when they see fraud and this other stuff taking, it's like insult to injury. That's why this matters so much. That's why this matters so much. Now, on the point of the Trump administration now doing something at least on people receiving, welfare benefits and then banning entire countries. It's a long list of countries. As of now, the State Department is restricting migration or like visa applications, not for like temporary stay, but just overall. This includes Afghanistan, it includes the Bahamas, it includes Bangladesh, Brazil, Colombia, Congo, Dominica, Ghana, Guatemala, Haiti, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Pakistan, Russia, Senegal, Somalia, and a very, 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 very long list of other countries. If you break it down, it's a lot of Latin American countries, a lot of African countries, a lot of Middle Eastern countries, and a handful of Asian countries. And that's basically the breakdown of it. In other words, a lot of the third world, if you want to come and try to temporarily migrate to the United States, you're blocked right now. And in addition to that, the Trump administration, they've actually made tighter visa programs overall. I know people who've been affected by this. Even very good workers are being affected by this. It's very hard to come to the United States right now to work. They're making it basically so that when you try to apply for a work visa, they really, really, really look into you. Like it's a lot more strict than it used to be. It's a lot. I personally know actual good workers who actually lost their visas. It's a much higher threshold. And the way they're looking at it is a few different tiers. One, have you been receiving government subsidies? Are you on food stamps? Will you potentially go on government-funded programs? Okay, maybe you're a good worker, but maybe you're going to retire in 5 years. And then you're going to need Medicaid or government-subsidized programs for housing, whatever else. They're actually not allowing you in. The other thing is just basic. Are you making an effort to conform to society? And this is actually a big one. If you've come here and you've made no effort to learn English, you never bothered learning English, you never bothered integrating into American society, they're actually banning you on that also. There are people they're basically not allowing to stay, even based on failure to conform to society, which is very interesting, actually. That's a pretty interesting threshold. They're making it so that, look, if you want to come here, it's because you want to be part of the American system, not because you want to come here and make money and send it home. The Trump administration is even talking about the problem of remittances, where people come here, they work, they send money outside the country. They're noting that some countries, like 20, 30% of the country's entire GDP comes from remittances. I believe they talked recently about Ecuador is one of many examples where roughly a quarter of the country's GDP is remittances from people coming to the United States, working, and then sending money outside the country. Which effectively means money from work is not going back into the American economy or into American businesses. It's being siphoned out, which is actually terrible for an economy. And on this front also, it doesn't even end here, right? The U.S. government is now also targeting online scam networks. And U.S. Attorney to Washington, D.C., Judge Jeanine Pirro, she gave an update on this. This is what she said. She said, online scam networks are destroying the financial lives of Americans every day, and the criminals running them thought they were untouchable, operating from the other side of the world. Today, some of these criminals found out that U.S. law enforcement will hold them accountable no matter where they are. And she said, the Scam Center strike force was built precisely for this kind of coordinated cross-border disruption, taking the fight directly to these criminal enterprises. Now, this is a big deal. Online scams are costing like Americans just in general a lot of money. Not even just Americans, like everybody. I know personally, I receive several scam calls every single day. I don't know if I'm unique in this, that I get so many. I'm a public figure. I know that my information is kind of out there, so I get a lot of fake emails. I get a lot of fake phone calls. I get scam calls all the time. And I know a lot of other people who experience the same thing. Maybe not on the same scale I do, but it's a very big problem. And it takes place in a lot of ways. You could be getting email. I know people, I'll give you a few examples. People get emails and it looks like it's from like the toll service for the freeway system, right? Where, for example, in New Jersey, we have the Parkway. And if you want to use the Parkway, you have to have like a pass thing where you put it on your car, on your window, and it automatically scans. A lot of people have been getting alerts saying, hey, your pass is expired, or maybe you have outstanding fees based on this and you have to pay it. And it looks like a totally legitimate email. That is one of the ways that these scams are taking place. It might be a notice and it looks like it's from a legitimate business that you may do business with, or what looks like a bad sale. They might say, you recently purchased this $700 item from an online shop. To cancel the order, click this link, And if you click that link, they might either try to infect your computer with a virus, or it's going to redirect you to a scam website. This is one of the fraudulent ways they do it. Artificial intelligence has just put this stuff on like overdrive, because AI, what you have happening is scammers can make fraudulent emails that look totally legitimate. This is a big step up in the way that scams used to work, where how many of you received an email from a Nigerian prince saying that he was trapped outside his country and needed you to help him get back to his country, and he'd send you half his money or something like that? This is a big step up from the old Nigerian prince schemes, right? This is pretty big theft. Another big thing is like artificial or fake kidnapping things, where they even use AI sometimes to take the voice of your actual family members because they're tracking you on like social media. Use AI to create fake hostage situations and make you pay a ransom. Very convincing scams happening on a very large scale. Now, a lot of these scams are taking place from outside the United States, but some involves cooperation from within the country. The United States is now actually going after these scam centers. For the most part, some of it comes out of Mexico. A lot of it comes out of India, like a ton of it comes out of India. And a lot of it comes from East Asia, or like Southeast Asia, right? So you could say South and Southeast Asia or East Asia, a lot of it. It's Chinese, it's in Cambodia or Thailand or in these countries, right? And what's happening a lot of times in the Asian, like the Southeast Asian or East Asian side of it, a lot of times it's being done by the Chinese mafia. And so sometimes it's people being enslaved because they have gambling debts. Sometimes it's people who've been kidnapped and they're being forced to run these call centers where they're just doing like just ongoing rolling fraud. And that's how it works. The U.S. government is now working with local governments in these countries to force them to actually go after these scam centers. In India, from what I understand, it actually is illegal to do it, but it's just not really targeted. So in India, you have a lot of these scam centers. if you report them, they might do something about it. They probably won't. It is kind of just, it's a tolerated crime, but happening on a large scale. In Mexico, where you just have rampant, cartels and crime anyways, it's also relatively tolerated. But the U.S. government is now actually doing stuff about this. The U.S. government has actually created a task force to go and disrupt the financial networks, to seize the bank accounts, to do all this stuff. I'll tell you all a story, okay? I was talking to a police officer several years back, okay? I was talking to a police, this is kind of a funny story, but I was talking to a police officer several years back before the government was actually really doing anything about this. There was a woman who was distraught, called up the police department, and she fell for a Romeo scam. Does anybody know what a Romeo scam is? Basically, you'll have men who will pretend to fall in love with a woman, and they'll basically eventually start asking them for money. They'll be like, basically they'll start chatting them up on Facebook, or they'll reach out to them on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, and it's like a super guy, man of your dreams type. And they often target older women, who actually a lot of older women do have a lot of money typically, right? They'll target older women and they'll pretend to fall in love with them, okay? And what they'll do is the woman, they'll develop a relationship with them. They'll love bomb them. They'll use all kinds of methods. I mean, it's terrible stuff. And then they start asking for money. Hey, babe, I really want to come visit you. Can you buy me an airplane ticket? Oh, no, I'm stranded. I used the money you gave me to get the airplane ticket. Now I'm stuck in this country and I have no money. They took my passport. I need money for a hotel. Oh, no, now I'm facing criminal charges. I need to hire a lawyer. And then before you know it, the woman shelled out $10,000, $20,000. I have a lot of things like this. It's really terrible, actually, right? It's really terrible. And you have a lot of women who get scammed like this. I mean, guys get scammed too, but they have one that really targets women. It's really terrible. So this police department, I was talking to a police officer about this story, right? Police department gets this woman who comes in and says, I fell for this scam. I need to get my money back. They basically wiped me out. They go through a long process. They look at the bank account and they realize that the scammers did something stupid. The scammers did not lock her out of her bank account, and they kind of took her account but didn't fully take it, and they were basically pouring money into her account. And the police officer was like, ma'am, okay, we've basically locked your account. The bank account is yours, and there's money pouring into it in real time from these, scammers. And the officer was like, ma'am, there is millions and millions and millions of dollars in this account. And the woman's like, what? She's like, and the officer is like, yeah, we closed it. This is your account. It's yours. There's millions upon millions of dollars in it. And he goes, is there anything else I can do for you? And the lady's like, nope, I think I'm fine. Basically. I mean, you could argue it's a pretty messed up thing because this is money these guys were stealing from other people. But the officers basically, these guys were morons. They didn't properly lock her out of this account, and they were pouring money into her bank account because they were using it as the central place for their scams, and she got all the money. Interesting story, right? The federal government now is actually starting to do this too. So what the federal government is doing is they're actually going after not just these networks and working with local law enforcement to shut down these operations. They're also going after the finances. And so if the government is now saying, okay, this person was scammed, where did it go, bank account, crypto wallet, they're actually seizing the assets. So they're actually seizing the financial assets of these scammers. Because it actually is traceable. It's a stupid crime, and it's crazy it's taken this long for anything to be done about it, because it is traceable. This is a traceable crime. Because if you get scammed, you're sending the money somewhere. Sometimes they give you their real names because you have to send the money to their country. It's just because it's transnational crime. Unless the local government does something about it, nothing can be done. Now the U.S. government is working on it. They can actually go back and trace the crimes because it's all traceable crime. And they're actually doing something about it now. Big update on this. Speaking of other countries working against the interests of the United States, Canada is allegedly blocking the United States from accessing information about the drug boats. Why are they doing that? It's because America is blowing up drug boats. CBA, Canadian media, said this. The Department of National Defense says that it has safeguards in place to prevent intelligence from being shared with elements of the U.S. military that have carried out numerous lethal strikes on small boats in the Caribbean. They say in a statement to CBC News, the department said that intelligence gathered during Operation Carib is restricted to the Joint Interagency Task Force running the operation and its partners, and is caveated to not share with any elements of Operation Southern Spear. By spear, they mean like the tip of that missile hitting those drug boats, right? They say Southern Spear is the name the Pentagon has given to its militarized anti-drug trafficking campaign that has seen at least 151 people killed in airstrikes against boats suspected of carrying drugs to the U.S. since last year. They say those attacks have been harshly criticized as illegal killings of people who have not been convicted of any crime. Why is this a crime? Here's why. The Trump administration has designated certain cartels and organized gangs as being terrorist organizations. The drug trade is killing upwards of 100 million Americans every single year. More Americans being killed by drugs in a full-scale war. More Americans being killed every single year than 9/11 and the bombing of the Twin Towers. More Americans being killed every single year than the entire Vietnam War. More killed every year than all of Iraq, all of Afghanistan. More of us being killed full scale by drugs. And these people are the ones bringing it in. So what's the Trump administration doing? They're bombing them. What is the legal basis of that? Well, the legal basis is, anti-terrorism laws and extrajudicial methods being available for the use against designated terrorists. That is the actual law for that. Now, you could agree with that or not, but frankly, this has been in place since after 9/11. And so what's happening is this. These boats carrying what is alleged to be drugs are by the media and by certain politicians being called fishing boats. So these are high-speed fishing boats. I guess they're trolling the waters at 70 or 100 miles an hour. Because, if you want to catch really fast fish, you got to go fast. So the fish have to catch up when you're trolling, going 70 miles per hour with a speedboat with 4 engines on the back. Because that's how these people are fishing, okay? These are fishing boats without fishing equipment, because that's how they're fishing, right? So they're fishing boats without fishing equipment, because normally, because I grew up partly in, Point Pleasant Beach area. I grew up all over the place. I grew up in a fishing town. I used to work the docks. My dad was a commercial fisherman in the off-season, monkfish, by the way. Normally, you have big nets on the back of a fishing boat. Normally, for a fishing boat, you have fishing equipment. These boats do not have fishing equipment. And so, but maybe again it's because they're doing high-speed trolling with fishing rods. They keep hidden when they're being viewed. They also paint their boats blue to make them blend in with the water. Now, why do they paint the tops of the boats blue? Maybe it's so the fish don't jump out of the water and see the boat. It makes the boat invisible, so the boat blends in with the ocean. Now, that's very interesting because normal fishermen, they paint the tops of their boats orange because if you get lost in the ocean, you want somebody to find you. So these fishermen are very smart. They're painting their boats so it's camouflaged with the water to fool the fish on the top. They also have barrels, big barrels of resources. We presume those are barrels of fish that they're catching with high-speed trolling without nets. And so these are obviously fishing boats according to the mainstream media, because that's how fishing apparently works now. I've never seen it, but according to the mainstream media, these are actually fishing boats. So that's the way the story is, right? Now, that being said, I actually have a new show. The new show airs today, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you haven't seen it yet, it's the Josh Philipp Show. Joshphilipp. Everyone spells it wrong. Philipp. Brand new show. Be sure to check it out, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And the episode airing today, it's going to be on how Americans shouldered the cost of global medicine, why medicine costs so much, and how Americans were basically subsidizing the entire system of the global medical system. Crazy episode. You've probably heard about it a little bit. I actually dig into the data on it. So you might have heard these different things. In this episode, I actually show you the facts. I actually look into it and I'll show you everything that's really been happening with this. It's a very important episode, very informative, and kind of crazy, frankly, if you're wondering why you pay so much for medications. That airs today, 4 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. That's the Josh Philipp Show. Link to that in the description. That being said, everyone, thank you so much for your support. I'm glad you enjoy my humor. Glad you like it. Anyways, thank you all so much for your support. I love doing the show with you all. And again, join me today again, 4 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube for the new show. In the meantime, thank you so much for being here. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.